Now we have seen how we can get the variables which are declared inside the namespace into the scope. Okay, so I hope you are clear with this point. Now the next point about the namespace is something like this. Namespaces can be extended. Okay, so let me tell you what does this line means. Okay, so let's say you're declaring sector1 namespace over here. Now in this sector1 namespace you have two variable and one function. Okay, let's say you declare one more namespace. So you can write namespace followed by, let's say, with same name. And let's say in this namespace, let's say you write C is equal to 30. Then this is not going to be an error because, as I said, namespaces can be extended. So when you write same namespaces with same name, what compiler is going to do is compiler going to club them. Okay, compiler will club them into one single namespace with the name that you are giving to the namespace. Okay, so that's why if you want to split your big namespace into smaller chunks, then you can do that, and the compiler is going to extend them, or compiler is going to club them. Okay, actually, so that's why we say that namespaces can be extended. Okay, if the name of the namespace is different, then it's a different story. Then it becomes a different namespace, different scope. But if you are giving same name to the namespace, then they will be clubbed by the compiler. Okay, so now let's say if you want to access C variable or C identifier, which is declared inside sector1 namespace, you can easily do that. Okay, and if you want to print it over here, let's say in bar function, you can easily do that. So let's say I write C out, C followed by, let's say I write C, then, and if I compile it now, let's clear the terminal first. So now you can see that we are getting output as 10, 20 followed by 10, 30. Okay, so the C is getting printed or C is getting accessed. So I hope you have got this point that namespaces can be extended. If you declare same namespace with same name, let's say multiple times, then compiler will simply club them. Okay, but if you declare, let's say, two namespaces with two different names, then they are two different namespaces. Okay, so in this case, now let's say you want to now access C, which is now part of sector2 namespace, then what you have to do now? You will have to write sector2 scope resolution C. Okay, so in this way you can access sector2 C in the code or in your function. Okay, so I hope you are clear with this point. Now the another important thing about the namespace is, let me tell you about how we can define a function which we are declaring inside the namespace. See here what we have done. We have a namespace with name sector1. Now in this sector1 namespace we have declared one function, that is foo. Now what I want to do is I want to define this function. So there are two options. One option is very simple. You can directly declare this function inside the namespace. Okay, so you can directly write something like this. Let's say I am in foo. You can do something like this. You can always do this. Okay, obviously this cout cannot be found because we haven't included or we haven't used std namespace, so you will have to do std scope resolution cout. Okay, now let's say you want to call this foo function. What you can do? Let's say you want to call this foo function from bar. So you will have to do something like, again, you can use any of the three options. So in this case, you will have to write sector1 scope resolution foo, and you will have to call it as it is a function. So obviously you will have to write parentheses after that in order to call it, right? So if I now execute this code, obviously by compiling it, you can see that we are getting I am in foo here. Okay, so the foo function is getting called. Obviously, as you can do it like this. You can obviously you can also get this foo function in your scope by this syntax. Okay, so you can also write something like this, and then foo will come into your scope and you will be able to call foo function. So this is also a valid syntax. So now if I compile the code and if I run it, I will get the same output. So let's quickly see. Yes, we are getting the same output. You can use any one of the syntax as you are using it for the variable. Okay, so the same syntax will also apply for the functions. Okay, the point is, let's say I want to define this function, let's say outside of the namespace. I just want to declare it over here in the namespace, and I want to define it outside of the namespace. Let's say my function is very big and I don't want my code of the namespace to become very lengthy. So I want to define the function outside of the namespace. So how we can do that? So the syntax is very easy. What you have to do is you have to write return type of the function followed by name of the namespace. So in this case, name of my namespace is sector1, followed by scope resolution operator, followed by name of the function, which is foo, followed by parenthesis. If there are some argument in the function, then you can write them. Otherwise, you will then quickly write the body. So here you will write cout I am in foo. Okay, and here we will have to write std : cout. So in this way, you can define a function which is declared inside the namespace outside of the namespace. So I hope you will remember the syntax. Syntax is very easy. What you have to do, you will have to write return type of the function. Then you will have to write name of the namespace followed by scope resolution operator followed by name of the function. And in parentheses, if there are some argument, then you write their names and then you write function body. Okay. So I hope you will keep the syntax in your mind, that how we can define a function outside of the namespace which is declared inside the namespace. Okay, so I hope you will keep all the points that we have discussed in this video in your mind. Now, another interesting thing about C++ is whenever you declare any variable inside a global scope, by default, they will be declared inside a namespace, and that is a standard namespace in C++, not standard namespace. The name of the namespace is actually called as global namespace. So let me just quickly repeat my point. Whenever in C++ you declare any variable inside a global scope, by default they get into a namespace called as global namespace. So let me just quickly show you. Let's say I am declaring a variable, let's say global, and let's say I initialize it to, let's say 40. Then by default this global variable is basically placed inside a namespace called as global. Now how you can access the global variable, or how you can access the variable which are by default placed inside the global namespace? So the one syntax that we usually use, or we have already used, is we can directly access them by their name. Okay, so we can directly use them. So we can write something like this. Okay, so we can directly access them. The another syntax to access the variable in the global namespace is something like this. You can access them like this. So you will have to write scope resolution followed by name of the global variable or global identifier, and then you will get access to them. Okay, so I hope you remember this syntax. We have seen this syntax in the scoping module. Okay, so if you remember, in the scoping module we have used this syntax when we have some global variable and same global variable is also present in your local scope. So in that case there is a name conflict, because of which we don't actually by default able to access the variable which is declared inside global scope. So for that, what we have done is we use this syntax. And why we are able to use this syntax? Because by default, whatever variables or functions or identifiers which are declared inside the global scope are by default placed inside a namespace called as global namespace. And if you want to access the variable inside the global namespace, how you can do that? You can directly access them by their name. This is the first thing, because by default the global variables or global namespace variables are by default in the scope. Okay, or the another syntax is you can write scope resolution operator followed by name of the global variable, and in this way also you can access them. So let me just quickly revise what we have seen so far in this video, in this module. So we have seen what is the namespace, why we use namespace, why we worry about the namespaces. Then we have seen how we can create a namespace. So we have seen what is the syntax of creating a namespace. Then we have seen three different syntax to bring in the variable or the identifier which we declared inside the namespace into our scope, or into the function scope, or into the global scope. Then we have seen how the namespaces get extended if we declare the namespace with same name multiple times. Then we have seen how we can declare define a function outside of the namespace if it is declared inside the namespace. And finally, we have seen what is a global namespace and how we can access the variable which are by default declared as a global variable. Okay, so I hope you got all the concepts that we have got in this module. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, this module. Thank you so much for watching this module.